right?
Yeah, this person, whoever this professor was, is expert in transgender studies.
Nicholas Matt. And this professor went on the agenda, this Ontario news show, and announced publicly that there were no biological differences between men and women. It was like, huh. You'd think maybe the university would have had something to say about that, since they do, in fact, have a biology department. But oh no, that went by without notice. That was perfectly fine. It's insane.
It's such an insane thing to say. If there's no biological difference, then why are they taking hormones?
Well, that's a good question. Why bother with the surgery and especially the hormones?
If we weaken men, then if they become weak enough, they'll no longer be a threat. And I argue that point absolutely. I think the most dangerous men on earth are the weak men. And if you look at men who have no emotional control, because that's what they're trying to teach us to have. They're saying, listen, you're a man, you're allowed to just cry all the time and have no emotional control, no stoicism, just react to your emotions. You know what happens when you tell men to just react to their emotions? Anger. You have school shootings.
Weak is not good. The people who shoot up the high schools, they're weak.
You have rape, you have violence. That's what happens when you tell men to have no emotional control.
And life is a very difficult process. You're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. Those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order. And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be.
How are you doing?
Brilliantly and terribly.
Why did you include terribly?
Well, for example, now when I go, wherever I go in the world, people come up to me and they're usually, I wouldn't say they're happy to see me. They're often in tears, and they often have a pretty rough story to relate. You know, they were suicidal or nihilistic or trapped, you know, and they tell me that real fast. And then they say, I've overcome that to a large degree, and thank you for that. And you think, well, that's really something to have that happen over and over. In some ways, you might think, well, how could anything better possibly happen to you? But at the same time, it's an awful thing. Because you see, even in the revelation of their triumph, the initial depth of their despair. So I wouldn't change that. But it's not nothing. It's certainly not just happiness. It's better than happiness, but it's almost unbearable. I had a friend who taught me something. He's a very disagreeable person. He took my personality test, and he was like the most disagreeable person in 10,000. So he's a rough character. He looks like a pirate.
I like the sound of him already.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, corporations used to hire him to go in and clean up when things had got messy. So he would start at the bottom of the company and he would ferret out people who were taking all the credit when anything went right and then distributing all the blame when anything went wrong and stealing people's ideas and not doing their job. I talked to him one day. I had to deal with some issues in my lab. I had students who were underperforming, and the higher performing students who were doing their job were getting demoralized because of that. And so I had to do something about it. And I really don't like firing people. I was talking to my friend about firing people. I said, I really can't stand it. How do you manage it? Because you fired hundreds of people. He said, I really like it. And I thought, oh, well, I've never heard anyone say that before. And he said, yeah, I go into these companies and I find these people who are exploiting everyone around them and making life miserable for everyone and trying to gain credit where no credit is due and being narcissistic and manipulative. And I ferret them out and I stop them, and it's just fine. Have you all noticed that food has become much more expensive? That shelter has become much more expensive? That energy is more expensive? That many consumer goods are simply unavailable? Can you not see that this is going to get worse if the Deloitte-style moralists have their way? How much short-term pain are you going to be required to sustain? Decades worth? All your life and the life of your children? It's very likely for your own benefit. Remember that. And all this painful privation is not only not going to save the planet, it's going to make it far worse. So, for example, when the Soviets collectivized the farms, they pretty much wiped out or raped and froze to death all of their competent farmers. They called them kulaks, and they attributed class guilt to them. They killed all of them, pretty much, shipped them off to Siberia and froze them to death, and they were the productive agriculturalists in the Soviet Union. And then in the 1930s in the Ukraine, because of that, about 6 million Ukrainians starved to death. But the Soviets were big on collective guilt. And all of these things that you hear about now, like white privilege, for example, they're variants of collective guilt. I
I pick your bloody identity, whatever it happens to be, and then I make you a guilty member of that category, and then you and the rest of the guilty members of that category are judged as a unit. It's murderous pushed to its extreme.
You know, one of the things that people might want to know who are listening is that if you have a memory that's older than about 18 months and it haunts you, and when it comes up involuntarily, it produces a stress reaction, what that means is that as far as your nervous system is concerned, and so as far as your body's concerned, that danger hasn't gone away. And what's happening is an unconscious alarm system that's looking for pitfalls and holes is warning you that the map that you're using is incomplete in a manner that might enable you to fall into the same hole. And so one of the things that people can do that's very useful is, if you have memories like that plague you, is to bring them to mind voluntarily instead of waiting for them to come after you involuntarily, and then to think through what has changed and what might not have, but also to come up with a plan so that if a similar circumstance arose, you'd be in a better position in one way or another to deal with it. So now a counselor, a physician, or social worker risks his or her license, reputation, and livelihood if she or he dares talk to a minor about identity. But a butcher masquerading as a benevolent surgeon can castrate with impunity and be celebrated as a moral paragon. How about we stop doing this? It's wrong. Do I really have to say this? It's not just wrong. It's Auschwitz and Gulag level wrong. It's Nazi medical experiment level wrong. It's Unit 731 level wrong. And I'll put a trigger warning on that. Look up Unit 731 at your extreme peril, and I'm dead serious about that.
Saying men should be dangerous. By dangerous, that implies I should be ready to threaten someone, to hurt somebody.
No, you should be capable of it. But that doesn't mean you should use it. There's nothing to you otherwise. Like, if you're not a formidable force, there's no morality in your self-control. If you're incapable of violence, not being violent isn't a virtue. People who teach martial arts know this full well, right? If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously you learn to control it. Both of those come together. And the combination of that capacity for danger and the capacity for control is what brings about the virtue. Otherwise, you confuse weakness with moral virtue. I'm harmless, therefore I'm good. It's like, no, that isn't how it works. That isn't how it works at all. If you're harmless, you're just weak. And if you're weak, you're not going to be good. You can't be, because it takes strength to be good. It's very difficult to be good. It's very helpful for people to hear that they should make themselves competent and dangerous and take their proper place in the world.
Why dangerous?
Because it's the alternative to being weak. And weak is not good. The people who shoot up the high schools, they're weak.
How is it good to be dangerous?
Because it makes you formidable. And life is a very difficult process. And it's not you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. That doesn't mean that you should be cruel. It doesn't mean any of that. There's a statement in the New Testament, the meek shall inherit the earth. But the meek isn't well translated. Those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order. And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. It's like, that's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea, because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility. You'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous.
So my question to you is, how much responsibility do you feel about the way in which
It isn't even what I
your
feel.
work
It's
is
not
used?
how much responsibility I feel. It's how much responsibility I take.
Right.
Right. And I take as much responsibility as I possibly can. Right. Which is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm going around the world, I'm talking in different cities, I'm talking to people as much as I can. I'm putting out content that I think is useful for people online, and I'm clarifying what I think. I have 300 videos on YouTube. Virtually, for all intents and purposes, every single word I've said to students in a professional capacity since 1992. And despite the fact that I have innumerable, highly motivated enemies, they haven't been able to find one thing I've said in 30 years that, what would you say, justifies any of those accusations, or any other accusations for that matter. So it's quite the phenomenon.
And this notion that identity is somehow subjectively defined and that that subjectivity can be pinned down to the moment couldn't possibly be a claim that's more preposterous and immature. Now, I told the Senate in Canada, when Canada passed Bill C-16, which was the pronoun law that every idiot country in the world seems to be jumping on now and passing, that the consequence of confusing people about the difference between men and women would be the production of a psychogenic epidemic. And so I felt that for every one trans child that we hypothetically saved, we'd probably doom 1,000. And that seems to have played itself out with near perfect accuracy over the last 6 years. And there is some unbelievable narcissism and self-aggrandizement in that proposition that you can define your identity subjectively by whim at any moment, and that everyone else has to abide by that as if it's incontrovertible fact.
If you think that 1619 was the true founding of the United States, what you're saying is the country is founded on the principle of oppression. The country is founded on the idea of exploiting some people so that other people can get ahead, and that's what America is. Now, if you think that's what America is, most fundamentally, then you probably think that America needs to be fundamentally changed and reformed and overhauled from top to bottom.
But if that is America in its fundament, then why isn't there still slavery? Like, because look, this is the crucial issue here, because if it's the case that the US was founded on the principle of enslavement, then why did slavery disappear? What's the explanation coming from the left for that?
I saw a professor at an event, something like this. He came out and trumpeted this bloody, environmentally friendly house he built. And then he came out to all the kids and he said, you know, my wife and I decided that we were only going to have one child. And I think that's one of the most ethical things we could have possibly done. And I would strongly encourage you to do the same. I don't know where he thought he was, but to come out in front of all those kids and basically tell them that the whole human enterprise is so goddamn corrupt that the best thing they could possibly do is limit their multiplication. There's no excuse for that. And you think, well, you know, we're going to destroy the planet. We have to do this. We have to demoralize the youth to be ethical. It's like, yeah, really, that's your theory? You're going to demoralize young people to be ethical? You have no idea how many people that's killing. I see people everywhere, all over the world, they're so demoralized, especially young people with a conscience, because they've been told since they were little that there's nothing to them but corruption and power. It's like, how the hell do you expect them to react? You know, well, I shouldn't do anything then, you know.
It's okay to hate trans people.
No, it's not okay, particularly to hate anyone, maybe even your enemies. And what I've talked about has virtually nothing to do in any real technical sense with trans people. The stance I took on Bill C-16 was an anti-compelled speech stance, and I stand by it. Government. Absolutely. There's never been a piece of legislation in the history of the English common law that compelled private speech. Not once. There has been legislation that compelled commercial speech. So, for example, if you sell tobacco, you have to put a warning on the product. But that's commercial speech. It's very, very limited, and even that's been extraordinarily limited. The Supreme Court in the US in the 1940s came out and stated forthrightly that there was to be no compelled speech generated by the legislative and the executive branches, that was unconstitutional. And it violates English common law tradition. And the fact that it has to do with transgender people is virtually irrelevant. The issue is compelled speech.
Do you believe in equal pay?
Well, I made the argument there. It's like, it depends on who defines it.
So you don't believe in equal pay?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
The British woman who disagreed with you, she was so unreasonable. And I think people like that you just answered her again and again. But nobody challenges them ever in their world.
So conceptual worlds are set up so that the challenge isn't present. You know, the university disciplines that are particularly politically correct, like women's studies, are completely homogenous in their internal viewpoint.
They've never heard these facts.
First of all, they don't regard them as facts because, well, they don't regard science as an independent and valid discipline, let's say. They regard it as an extension of the oppressive patriarchy, and they're not all that interested in facts. They're interested in ideological completeness, let's say.